I came across this great thread on Twitter this morning that really showcases why police culture is the way it is. So, this is from what I think is a retired cop, though that isn't clear from this thread. But Paul Manning here, who in his profile says he's a hashtag soldier, cop, writer, screenwriter, organized crime expert, investigative journalism. So, I assume he's into journalism now, but again, I'm not clear on that. But I want to share this as this story really paints a picture of what police culture is like and why there aren't quote unquote good apples. So he starts off here saying, "Want to know why it's so hard for cops to be good apples? It was 2007, and I was assisting a call with an officer I'd never met before. He was from another team working overtime. Right in front of me, he broke a kid's nose with a punch. The septum was clearly deviated, and blood was everywhere. The kid was handcuffed, and the officer inquired of me, quote, 'What should we arrest him for?' 'What did he do?' I inquired. 'He called me a name,' he said. After 20 minutes of trying to persuade me we should fabricate a crime, he had to let the kid go. 'We need to do notes, get our story straight,' he then told me. I don't need assistance in writing what happened. I found a quiet place and wrote the facts. As I wrote, I was joined by a female sergeant who knew this officer. She spent 20 minutes trying to convince me this kid was a shitbag, and my notes should reflect the danger he posed. I was disgusted. We don't behave this way. I went to the platoon commander and provided a statement for the assault I'd witnessed. An investigation commenced, one which should have been forwarded to SIU Toronto, which is an investigative unit in Ontario, SIU Ontario, that investigates basically police actions. So the investigator asked me questions like, how do you know his nose was broken? And where did you get your medical degree? Seriously? Then came the result. A phone call from the superintendent whilst I was home. Paul, our investigation is complete, and you've been found guilty of misconduct. In that you failed to communicate with a colleague, a verbal warning will be put on file. Be careful in the future. When I got back to work, I was moved from my team and away from my friends to this officer's team. Officers just point blank refused to talk to me and went to many calls by myself without backup. Then a message from another officer on team to meet him. He told me how we look after each other on this team. Don't stab each other in the back. Then for some fucked up reason, he dropped the N-bomb out of nowhere. I just drove off, leaving him sat there. Then I was called into the deputy chief's office with the same superintendent in my union rep. In front of both, he told me to be careful what you say in the future or you might not get backup when you need it. I was an inspector when I left the Met in 2005 to move to Canada, but my appraisal that year reflected incompetence and unworthiness of the position of constable. Every position or course I applied for, I was refused. I continued to whistleblow until the chief told me, quote, 'You really have no concept of brotherhood, do you?' Then I whistleblew anonymous. 2015-ish, after going off sick with PTSD from an attempted murder, I went public with everything, to be met with a covert operation by not only senior management but member of the city council and lawyers, telling anyone who would listen I'm, quote, nuts, crazy, and delusional. This is how they deal with officers who try to do the right thing. 2 warrants on my home, numerous criminal investigation, and 1 arrest later, and I'll still do the right thing, no matter what they try to do to me. The officer who broke the kid's nose is now a sergeant, probably helping others cover up their wrongdoings. Me, I'm off sick and will probably never find gainful employment again. So, former officer. Was it worth it? Fuck no. Would I do the same? Fuck yes. Would I advise other officers to break the blue wall of silence? Well, that's for them to decide, but it will end your career. Until you offer protection for good apples, you're asking them to give up their careers because of someone else's wrongdoing. Hashtag police brutality, Black Lives Matter, police reform. So this is the kind of story that we hear about all the time. I wish there was a website, and maybe there is, that kind of collects all these together. Stories of this kind of attempted whistleblowing, stories of cops being fired for doing the right thing, which I'll show you an example of that in a second here. But this really seems to be the culture in terms of how the police operate. There is this brotherhood where you have my back, I have your back, basically meaning when I do wrong as an officer, you're going to cover for me. I mean, that's what that means. There shouldn't be no brotherhood. The whole point of the cops are to protect and serve. You should be serving your community. If you are not doing that, then you should not be a cop. But the reality is, this is how the culture operates. This is why it's not just a few bad apples, but it's the entire culture. And this is exactly why the police need to be defunded. Take these responsibilities away from the cops. Issues like dealing with mental health calls, that should absolutely not be dealt with in terms of the police. You should have actual healthcare professionals deal with that kind of thing. Homelessness. There's no reason for the cops to deal with homelessness. That should be dealt with in terms of public housing and actually helping the homelessness, helping the homeless. I mean, there are so many ways that you can take responsibilities off of the police, defund the police. And when you look at city budgets, so I mention this because people put up a wall when you say defund the police, because really a lot of us, myself included for years, had no idea how much money is pumped into the police compared to everything else. So while you were seeing cuts to education, cuts to healthcare, cuts to infrastructure, you never see cuts to the police. So now when you look at city budgets, and I've seen a few, whether it's Detroit, New York, Toronto, Seattle, you see massive police budget, and then everything else is a fraction of what the police have. So, for example, in Detroit, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe the numbers almost exactly, which I may put up here in editing. It's $294 million put into the police and $9 million put into healthcare. I mean, when you see a graph like that, it becomes clear that defund the police is not a radical position, but is the position that clearly everybody should be taking. Now, let me show you some other examples here. There was a reply here from Donald Best, who is also a whistleblower. Replied to Paul Manning here saying, retaliation is common against whistleblowers everywhere. Policing is no exception. Paul Manning's story has the ring of truth. When my squad and I executed a search warrant at a fellow cop's home and arrested him for corruption, we could never park our cars at the station. So here, they're going after a corrupt cop. Instead of the cop that was corrupt being ostracized, They were for actually arresting him for doing the corruption. More here. So just a few examples of what happens. This is Florida police. This is back in 2016. Florida police officer says he was fired for whistleblowing. A police officer in Miami Gardens, Florida, claims in court that he was fired for blowing the whistle on the city's practice of carrying out illegal searches and unlawful arrests of black males. And in fact, there has been countless examples of this. In fact, I believe not even just this city, but I think there's another city where there was also a very similar approach. Actually, I think it was Ferguson. Very similar approach to policing, where there were attempts to call it out, and it was shut down. And they continued the sort of policing where it was simply focusing on illegal searches and arrests of black men. Another example here. This is 2018. Police officer fired for not shooting black suspect. So thankfully, he sued and won $175,000. That's good. But this is the kind of thing that no officer should be put into the position where they have to sue because they were fired for not shooting somebody. So you see, this is the culture. When you put this much power and money into one area, into one agency that is armed to the teeth, that has the riot gear, has all the toys imaginable, this is what they're going to do. They have this mentality, and the only way to break it, there's no police reforming this. You cannot reform this. The only way to reform this is to defund them, take their power away. If they continue to have their power in terms of their budgets, then this is going to continue. The only way to end it is to use the only power that we have as a society, and to take their funds away, take their money away, and put it elsewhere. So not just, make up, straight cuts and that money goes nowhere. No, cut that money away and put that money into other areas, be it public housing, infrastructure, healthcare, whatever it is, education. So there has to be a reallocation of resources away from the police and into other areas in city budgets. It's that simple. And so I'll link to this this Twitter thread below the video so you can tweet it out, share it around. I think it's pretty clear what police culture is all about.